pleasure to be part of this community conversation today. And as we've already been reminded, people of faith, I think, have a particular responsibility for where we're headed and for action that will bring us more focus back into the peace opportunities that we all seek. What I propose to do is to start by giving you a little bit of background on Quaker motivations for peace, and then talk a little bit more about where Quakers in Australia are working on peace, and then focus on the arms trade issue, which is one that we have chosen to follow closely in the present time. So looking at the motivations behind our actions, we are essentially a religious group with a strong peace witness as part of our heritage, and our Christian-based faith has led us to a peace testimony against war, preparations for war, and taking part in war fighting. And I've just selected a couple of comments that have come through our own writings over the years. And the first one comes from the early days when Quakers were accused of being subverters of the peace in England. And they made a declaration to King Charles II in 1660. Our principle is to seek peace and to follow after righteousness and the knowledge of God, seeking the good and doing that which tends to the peace of all. The Spirit of Christ by which we are guided will never move us to fight with outward weapons. Moving along then to what was called the All Quakers or All Friends Conference in 1920, that was a global event where they made a comment: armaments are the weapons of organised violence and outrage. Their use is a denial of the true laws of good living. You cannot foster harmony by the apparatus of discord. Then when Australia became an independent yearly meeting, as we call ourselves, but basically a national religious body, in 1964, they made a statement in the following year, 65, saying, "We are agreed on the need to emphasise not only our conscientious objection to war and killing, but our conscientious objective, our determination to take positive action to build a society where war will be unthinkable." And then coming up to a gathering of young friends from different parts of the world in 1985, our testimony inspires us, yet we move beyond it to challenge our world with the call for justice. We are called to be peacemakers, not protesters. So our Quaker journey as peacemakers has become linked very much with our work for justice and human rights, as well as for peaceful relationships at all levels of society. Internationally, we have accredited NGO status at the United Nations, and our staff in the offices of New York and Geneva focus on promoting dialogue among diplomats on current challenges. This means that they are taking an active role in the work of the United Nations as much as they can, and advising Quakers about what are the issues that are coming up and feeding back the views of Quakers from around the world. Within Australia, we have a Quaker Peace and Legislation Committee, which is based in Canberra, where I am, and we seek to respond to national issues of peace and justice through submissions, lobbying, publishing up-to-date information for Quakers and other people. And our members across the country take part with others in public statements and actions for peace and justice. This includes non-violent witness at various events, and in this context, particularly arms trade fairs, as they're called. And most recently, the Friends School, which is in Hobart, and that's the only school that's a Quaker school in Australia, and has been going for over 100 years, it has recently adopted a policy of refusing sponsorship from arms manufacturers for STEM programs in the school. And it hopes to spread this word among other schools. So when we were faced with what's the place where we could make a difference, we had an opportunity to employ a peace worker, Jessica Morrison from Victoria, and we sat with her and with some other people she knew in Parliament and other groups, and we recognised that in order to make a difference, we had to pick a subject on which there was some movement within the political community, and the result of that was a decision to focus on the arms trade. And it's turned out that's been a very fortuitous decision, I think, because it has become increasingly clear that the arms trade is a major part of the challenges facing the world. So if I just look briefly at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute statistics for 2024, global military spending is $2.7 trillion, which is an increase of 9.4% over 2023. This is the sharpest rise since the Cold War ended. Needless to say, the biggest spenders are the United States with $895 billion, China, $266 billion, Russia, $126 billion, India, $75 billion, and Saudi Arabia, $74 billion. Those are sort of mind-boggling figures, but when you think also that overseas development assistance was $212 billion, 10 times less than what's being spent on armaments. And over 100 countries have increased their military budgets, and 2024 was actually the 10th year of rising spending, taking funds away from important social and economic budgets. So the proliferation of military resources is a source of instability for the world. So where does Australia fit in all this? The budget for defence in 25-26 is $1.7 billion, which is rising each year. And as you all know, I think, governments in recent years have stated their aim for Australia to become one of the 10 largest military exporters in the world. And they've already got to the 16th share at the moment. Quakers, therefore, looking at this issue, decided we must do a lot more to examine what is happening about the arms trade. And as a result of Jessica's work, we've put together and just published a detailed analysis called Australia's Opaque Arms Trade and Obligations under International Law. And we'll put a link to that report in the chat, I believe, at some point. We'll come back to that. So let me just identify some of the things that have come out of this piece of research. First of all, the word opaque is absolutely relevant. It is hard to get precise information on the military industry. Government departments report differently. For example, Department of Defence reports issuing permits for export worth $100 billion. while Foreign Affairs reports an actual export of 2.7 billion. Neither the public nor the Parliament have detailed knowledge about what weapons are being exported. The Customs Act lists 12 criteria for the approval of permits, including compliance with international law, as well as defence and national security interests. But it's not clear how defence weighs up these various criteria. For example, what if they think something's in the national interest, but it's also at risk of causing human rights violation? Where does the weight lie in that balance? The picture is made more opaque in recent times by the fact that under AUKUS, the USA and the UK do not have to seek permits at all. So the transparency gets reduced once again. The Arms Trade Treaty came into force 10 years ago, partly as a result of Australia's diplomatic efforts. It came into force in December 2014, and Australia was one of the first signatories. It establishes global standards to reduce human suffering, forbidding arms sales that might cause human rights violations, including violence against women and children. But the treaty is not working as intended, with too many countries, including Australia, failing to give adequate details of their arms trade practices. Details that are available indicate that Australia is exporting weapons and components to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Sudan, South Sudan, Philippines, Israel, and Indonesia. And it's unclear whether these exports have facilitated human rights abuses. It is also not clear whether the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is consulted for such advice. In the case of Yemen and the war there, UN experts have said that supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates was perpetuating the conflict, but Australia did not pause its sales. Now, European countries with similar levels of military exports fulfil their transparency obligations more effectively than Australia. The UK, Netherlands, Germany, Spain and France all publish detailed data about destination countries of specific exports and allow parliamentary scrutiny on a routine basis. Canada and the EU go even further in revealing their guidelines, which clearly take into account of how human rights and humanitarian law are observed in the destination country. So the level of secrecy operating in Australia's defence contracts results in limited public scrutiny of large exports. One result is the possibility of corruption. And Transparency International rates Australia as having a moderate risk of enabling such corruption. Something else that's mentioned in the report is that Australia seems, on contrary to specific clauses in the treaty, to exclude parts and components in its public statements about not selling weapons to Israel, for example. Whereas the treaty is quite clear about the fact that components are included. So you can see that the more we began to look into all this, the more alarming it seemed to become as to what was happening. And we have discovered that many other people are even more alarmed than we are. And these include people in government and Parliament. So what do we suggest should be done? In the report, we've got a number of proposals, and I'll just run through those. Allow parliamentary scrutiny of both the permits for export and the overall trade process. This could involve giving powers to a parliamentary committee to monitor licence approvals in the light of guidelines to ensure the avoidance of human rights violations. Such a committee could also review policies, including what I mentioned earlier, the exemptions that are given to the AUKUS partner. The second option is to ensure public reporting of all actual military exports and imports. This would include details of weapons types and the countries traded with. It's our view that it would help to centralise the role of foreign affairs and trade. After all, it is the Department of Government that is responsible for monitoring the international agreements that Australia has signed up to, including nuclear and chemical weapons agreements. It seems to us to be a perfectly sensible thing that its expertise would fit very appropriately to the work of monitoring the licensing and end-use reporting of the arms trade. It would also actually remove the strange contradiction that the Defence Department is promoting the arms trade as well as regulating it. The next item is making transparent the process of exports, which would include disclosing the criteria that are used for assessments and their relevance to the treaty. Next, implement actual end-use monitoring. This would include verification inspections and on-site checking whether human rights violations are likely or evident. Next, we think that Australia should increase its commitment to the global implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty, and this would include extra funding to support neighbouring countries in adhering to the principles of the treaty. If we believe in it, we should promote it in our own area. And the other point that we've got here is review the import policies to establish ethical criteria for our military import. This would exclude companies with probity issues that might lead to corruption. So that's what the report covers, but of course it's a lot more detail. It's about a 40-page report. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of detail in the report of the sort of material that is just mentioned in my summary. So let me go on a little bit further to say something about the other things that we've been involved in. Civil society, of course, played a very significant role in getting the Arms Trade Treaty created and adopted. There was a group of Nobel Peace Laureates and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and the American Friends Service Committee, that's our Quaker equivalent in the USA, publicised the tragic human impacts of the arms trade. And over the years, Quakers have sought to question the nature of the arms trade through petitions and public events. So the report that we've just been talking about has now been launched. It was launched at the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Canberra on the 27th of August this year by former Ambassador Peter Woolcott, who was the person running the whole UN activity when the treaty was being approved, and he was the Australian ambassador, and peace worker Jessica Morrison that I've mentioned. They both launched the report. Now, what's also happened is that we visited Parliament House on a number of occasions. We've talked to numerous MPs and senators so that they can learn about the campaign. A presentation was made to the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. And meetings have been held with the relevant officers in the Foreign Affairs and Trade and Defence departments and staff of the ministerial offices. As most of you will be aware, there's an estimates hearings week coming up very shortly in Parliament, and this will be an opportunity for further questions on the arms trade and Australia's role in it. And rather significantly, we feel, the Auditor-General has actually included the arms trade in a list of activities for his oversight in the coming year. Now, as part of the campaign, we've been getting support for a public statement calling for accountability in the arms trade and seeking government action to initiate a parliamentary review. This is a separate sheet. Again, we'll put this in the chat. It's called Civil Society Calls for Accountability in Australia's Military Trade, and it has been signed so far by 62 agencies, including no doubt some of agencies that you are connected with. There's some NGOs, faith groups, human rights organisations, peace groups, development networks, health and justice groups, to name just a few generic groups. But it's a very good list of many agencies who are very concerned about what's happening. Needless to say, what's happened in various parts of the world, particularly Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and other places in the world, have shown how much arms sales are making a significant contribution to war around the world. And it's our belief that this campaign needs widespread support to get the members of our government and parliament to recognise the absolutely essential role of monitoring and increasing the transparency connected with our role in the arms trade. So with that, I will leave it there.